Marcus Thompson never imagined that one dinner would rewrite his entire life. When he watched an elderly black woman being humiliated in an upscale restaurant, he faced a choice that most people avoid. He could stay silent, protect himself, and walk away, or he could stand up, risk everything, and do what was right. What happened next proves that the universe has a way of rewarding those who choose courage over comfort. This is a story about karma, kindness, and the moment when everything changes. Before we begin, if you believe that good deeds never go unrewarded, hit that like button right now. Subscribe and turn on notifications because stories like this remind us why kindness matters. Drop a comment telling us about a time you stood up for someone or wish you had. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the very end of this one. The twist will leave you speechless. Marcus had known struggle his entire life. At 34 years old, he worked 2 jobs just to keep his head above water. His days started at 5 in the morning at a warehouse, loading boxes until his back screamed. His evenings belonged to a security company where he stood watch over buildings that cost more than he'd earn in 10 lifetimes. The math was simple and cruel. 2 jobs barely covered rent, utilities, groceries, and his mother's mounting medical bills. His apartment told the story of a man who'd given up on luxury. Peeling paint decorated walls he didn't own. A second-hand couch sagged in the corner, its springs long defeated. Bills covered his kitchen table like fallen leaves, each one a reminder of how far behind he'd fallen. But the hardest part wasn't his own struggle. It was watching his mother, the woman who'd sacrificed everything to raise him alone, slowly losing her battle with diabetes. The medication she needed cost more each month, and insurance covered less and less. Despite everything, Marcus refused to let bitterness take root. His mother had taught him that wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts, but in character. She'd shown him that kindness costs nothing but means everything. Even when his pockets were empty, his heart remained full. He helped neighbors carry groceries. He shared his lunch with homeless veterans. He smiled at strangers who looked like they needed it. These small acts didn't pay bills, but they paid something more valuable. They kept his humanity intact. On this particular Friday evening, Marcus decided to do something radical. He'd received a small promotion at the warehouse, nothing major, just a tiny bump in pay and a new title. But it felt like a victory worth celebrating. For months, he'd been saving coins in a jar, quarters and dimes collected from couch cushions and forgotten jacket pockets. He'd finally saved enough for one meal at a nice restaurant. Not fancy by most standards, but nicer than anywhere he'd been in years. The Sterling Room sat in the wealthy part of town, where luxury cars lined streets and designer clothing filled shop windows. Marcus felt out of place the moment he walked through the heavy oak doors. Crystal chandeliers caught the evening light, throwing rainbow patterns across white tablecloths. Men in expensive suits discussed business over wine that cost more than Marcus's weekly grocery budget. Women dripped with jewelry that could have paid his mother's medical bills for a year. But Marcus had made a reservation, saved his money, and he belonged here as much as anyone else. He straightened his shoulders and followed the host to a modest table near the window. He'd just started reading the menu, quietly calculating what he could afford, when the restaurant's energy shifted. An elderly woman entered alone, moving with quiet dignity despite the weight of years. She was black, perhaps in her 70s, dressed in an elegant navy suit that spoke of refinement and taste. Her silver hair was styled perfectly, pearl earrings caught the light. Everything about her presence suggested grace, but Marcus watched the room's reaction and felt his stomach turn. The host's welcoming smile faltered. Whispers rippled through nearby tables like poison spreading through water. Well-dressed diners turned to stare, their expressions ranging from curiosity to something much uglier. The woman seemed to expect this. Her face remained composed, but Marcus saw something flicker in her eyes. Pain, exhaustion, the weariness of someone who'd fought this battle too many times. The host led her to the worst table in the restaurant, tucked beside the kitchen doors where staff rushed past constantly. The placement wasn't accidental. It was deliberate erasure, a message delivered without words. She sat without complaint, unfolded her napkin with steady hands, and waited for service that was clearly in no hurry to arrive. Minutes passed. Waiters walked by without making eye contact. The woman sat patiently, ignored while tables seated after her received immediate attention. Marcus tried to focus on his own menu, but he couldn't stop watching. He recognized the cruelty of invisibility, the violence of deliberate neglect. Finally, a waiter approached her table, his body language radiating reluctance. His voice carried across the quiet restaurant, louder than necessary. He questioned her reservation with barely concealed skepticism, asked if she was certain she had the right establishment, suggested that perhaps she'd be more comfortable at one of the casual dining chains across town. Each word was a small knife, cutting with surgical precision. The woman responded with quiet dignity, confirming her reservation, requesting to see a menu. But the disrespect continued. The manager appeared, a thin man with slicked hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. He joined the conversation, his tone dripping with false politeness that barely masked contempt. Other diners watched the scene unfold like entertainment. Then everything escalated. A businessman at a nearby table, red-faced and loud with expensive whiskey, decided to voice what others were thinking. His voice boomed across the restaurant. He complained about the declining standards of the establishment, questioned what kind of clientele they were allowing in these days, made it abundantly clear that he found her presence offensive to his dining experience. He demanded the manager remove her from his view, actually used those words, as if she were an unpleasant painting that could be taken down and stored away. The manager, revealing exactly where his loyalties lay, apologized to the businessman. Then he turned to the elderly woman and asked her to leave. Not suggested, not requested, demanded. The entire restaurant fell silent. A collective held breath, everyone watching to see how this humiliation would conclude. Marcus felt something break inside his chest. His hands gripped his menu until it crumpled. His heart hammered against his ribs. Every practical voice in his head screamed at him to stay quiet, to mind his business, to protect himself. He thought about his jobs, his bills, his mother's medication. He thought about how speaking up could cost him everything, how people who make waves often drown. But then he saw it. A single tear rolling down the woman's cheek, catching the chandelier light as it fell. She wasn't crying, wasn't making a scene, just one tear, escaping despite her composure. And Marcus remembered every lesson his mother had taught him, that silence in the face of injustice makes you complicit. That character is what you do when it's hard, not when it's easy, that some moments define your entire life. Marcus stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. Every eye in the restaurant turned toward him as he walked across the room to the woman's table. His voice came out steady despite his shaking hands. "Ma'am," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I would be deeply honored if you would join me at my table. I apologize on behalf of every person in this room for the disgraceful way you've been treated." The restaurant seemed to freeze. The woman looked up at him with surprise and something else. Hope, maybe. Or recognition of an unexpected ally. Marcus turned to face the manager, his security guard training helping him project calm authority. "What's happening here is racism, pure and simple. You should be ashamed. This woman has done nothing wrong except exist in a space where small-minded people have decided she doesn't belong." The manager's face went purple. He threatened to call security, to have Marcus removed. But Marcus didn't move. He stood his ground, placed himself between the woman and her tormentors, and waited. The businessman sputtered indignantly. Other diners whispered furiously. Some looked embarrassed. A few looked angry at being called out. "Ma'am," Marcus said again, extending his hand to the elderly woman. "Please, it would be my privilege." She took his hand. Let him guide her to his table by the window. As she sat down, Marcus noticed her hands were shaking slightly, the only outward sign of how much the confrontation had cost her, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Thank you," she said simply. "You have no idea what that meant." They shared a meal that Marcus could barely afford, but he didn't care about the cost anymore. They talked, really talked, the way strangers rarely do. She asked about his life with genuine interest. Marcus found himself opening up, telling her about his mother, his struggles, his dreams of finishing the college degree he'd abandoned when money ran out. She listened like his words mattered, like he mattered. When the evening ended, she pressed a business card into his palm. "True character reveals itself when it costs you something," she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you for being exactly who you are." Marcus barely glanced at the card before tucking it into his wallet. He paid the check, leaving him with almost nothing in his account, and walked home through streets that suddenly felt a little less heavy. He'd done the right thing. That had to count for something, even if only in his own heart. But the universe, it seemed, had different plans about what his courage would cost. 3 days later, Marcus lost his evening security job. The restaurant manager, vindictive and connected, had made calls, spread the word about a troublemaker who didn't know his place. Doors that were barely open slammed shut. His warehouse pay alone couldn't cover everything. Bills piled higher. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday, cheerful pink paper delivering devastating news. His mother's medication ran out. She rationed her insulin, hiding it from Marcus because she knew he'd go without food to pay for it. Everything he'd feared about speaking up came true. The cost of doing right threatened to destroy him. In desperation, searching through his wallet for anything he might have missed, Marcus found the business card. He actually read it this time. Eleanor Hayes, CEO, Hayes Global Industries. The name seemed familiar, so he Googled it on his cracked phone screen. His hands went numb. Eleanor Hayes wasn't just wealthy, she was a billionaire, a self-made titan who'd built an empire from nothing. Forbes lists, philanthropic awards, a reputation for social justice and corporate responsibility. The woman he'd defended was one of the most powerful people in the country. Marcus stared at his phone for an hour, pride and desperation warring inside him. He'd helped her because it was right, not for reward. Calling her now felt like tainting that moment. But his mother needed medicine. He needed a home. Sometimes survival requires swallowing pride. Before he could make the call, his doorbell rang. Marcus opened the door to find Eleanor Hayes standing on his crumbling doorstep, flanked by people in expensive suits carrying briefcases and tablets. Behind them, a moving truck idled at the curb. "Hello, Marcus," she said with a warm smile. "May I come in?" What happened next felt like a dream. Eleanor explained that she regularly visited high-end establishments incognito, watching how people treated someone they perceived as powerless. For 2 years, she'd witnessed countless acts of cruelty and indifference. Hundreds of people had watched injustice and chosen comfort over courage. Marcus was the first person to stand up, the only one. She'd researched his background, seen his character reflected in every choice he'd made. Now she had an offer that would change everything: full scholarship to complete his degree, a position at Hayes Global Industries with executive training, all of his mother's medical bills paid in full, debt erased, new apartment. One condition: she'd pay it forward by mentoring others and working on the company's social justice initiatives. Marcus broke down. Tears he'd held back for years finally fell. This couldn't be real. People like him didn't get miracles. But Eleanor's hand on his shoulder was solid and warm. "Courage should never be punished," she said quietly, "and it rarely goes unrewarded, even if the reward takes time to arrive." 6 months later, Marcus stood in front of the Sterling Room restaurant. But this time, he owned it. Eleanor had helped him purchase the establishment, fire the discriminatory staff, and rebuild it as a place that truly welcomed everyone. He hosted community dinners for those who couldn't afford fine dining. He trained staff on dignity and respect. The businessman who'd demanded Eleanor's removal had faced his own karma when his company collapsed after discrimination lawsuits exposed his character. Marcus's mother sat at the best table in the house, healthy and radiant, watching her son with pride that made her glow. Eleanor joined them for dinner, 2 unlikely friends brought together by one moment of choice. "You gave me more than opportunity," Marcus told Eleanor as dessert arrived. "You restored my faith that doing right still matters." Eleanor smiled. "You restored mine first. I was losing hope in humanity. Then you reminded me that good people still exist. They just need to be found and amplified." The restaurant hummed with conversation and laughter. Every table was full. Every person was welcome. And Marcus understood that his one act of courage had created ripples he'd never see the end of. The young waiter he'd hired after finding him homeless, the single mother who came for free community dinners and now had hope again, the kids he mentored who learned that character trumps comfort. One moment, one choice, one stand against injustice when it would have been easier to look away. That's all it took to change everything. Marcus's story proves something we forget too often. The universe keeps score in ways we can't predict. That one act of kindness, that moment of courage when everything tells you to stay silent, it matters more than you know. Standing up for others is never wasted energy. Character is tested precisely when it costs us something. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe for more stories that restore your faith in humanity. Comment below and tell us, what would you have done in Marcus's position? Be honest. Would you have stayed quiet to protect yourself, or would you have stood up? Share this video with someone who needs to remember that good deeds create ripples. Tag someone who's always standing up for others. Let them know their courage is seen and valued. Remember, you could be the Marcus in someone else's story. That moment is coming, if it hasn't already. When it does, choose courage, choose kindness. Choose to be the person who stands up when everyone else sits down. Next time, we'll bring you another incredible story. She was fired for being pregnant, humiliated, and dismissed. Years later, she returned as the new CEO. You won't believe what happened to those who wronged her. Until then, be kind, be brave, and remember that the smallest acts of courage can create the biggest miracles. The world is watching. Make sure your character shows.